And we're streaming on Facebook, my personal Facebook, the Educational Freedom Institute Facebook, Educational Freedom Institute YouTube, my personal YouTube, and my personal Twitter account as well. So yeah, we're live now and streaming on all those platforms. And just to let the audience members know, as usual, we're just kind of hanging out with Bryan Caplan for a while, and myself and Matthew Nielsen, while the audience is kind of hopping on to the video stream before we actually get started with our interview with Bryan Caplan, which will talk about one of his recent books, The Case Against Education. It's a really interesting title and an even more interesting book. So I'm glad Bryan's here to talk with us today about that. For the audience members, we do have a feature with chat for the audience members. So if you're watching on any of those Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter platforms on the live stream, you can comment any of your questions, or even if you just have a comment about something you're thinking about, or maybe your thoughts on the Case Against Education book that Bryan Caplan wrote, we can feature some of those comments if you comment in any of those platforms, and they'll show up on the bottom of the screen. So feel free to comment your questions or thoughts on anything that we're talking about today. We'll be here for at least 45 minutes, I think, discussing these issues with Bryan. And we're also going to be giving away, we'll do a random drawing after this for Bryan Caplan's book, The Case Against Education. I'll pull up a picture of that now. The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. So super interesting book. I've read it. Matthew Nielsen's reading it right now as well. And so we'll give away one of the audience members a free version, a hardcover version of Bryan Caplan's book. So be sure to get your comments and questions in so that you can be eligible for the random drawing for that free book. So I do think we have a good amount of people that have hopped on to the live stream at the moment. So, Matthew Nielsen, if you want to go ahead and do some formal introductions, I think we can get going with the discussion.
Cool. Yeah, let's start. So I'm Matthew Nielsen. I'm the board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute, and we're joined again, as always, with by Corey DeAngelis. He's the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. He's also the director of school choice at the Reason Foundation and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Our special guest today is Dr. Bryan Caplan of George Mason University, where he is a professor of economics. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and we're going to talk with him today, again, as Corey mentioned, about his book, The Case Against Education. So thanks, Dr. Caplan, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So to get us rolling, just start our conversation, and our listeners know that we like to do a little bit of free-form discussion once we get into it. But to start off, we always start with a question or two, and then just kind of take us where the conversation leads. So the first question that I'm going to pose to you, well, I don't know, Corey, do you want to start with one of your devil's advocate questions? We had a good one.
I think the best way to start is, hey, Bryan, not all of our listeners have read your book, even though everybody should read your book. Could you just give us a quick overview, maybe 1 minute or a couple minute overview, synopsis of what you found, what you, and just a quick overview of your book, The Case Against Education.
Yeah, so the main thing that my book does is try to understand, why does education pay in the labor market? There's a standard story that says you go to school, they pour useful skills into you, you learn those skills, and then when you're done, employers want to hire you because you've got a lot of useful skills. And that story is not totally wrong, but there's something very fishy about it as a complete story. In particular, it just seems like you spend a lot of your time studying things in school that you're never going to use after the final exam. Seems like a lot of the stuff, even if you remembered it, would never be useful. And out of the stuff that in principle would be useful, very often you just forget it. So why would employers pay you for that? And the story that I push in the book is that a lot of the payoff from education comes from what economists call signaling. It's just another word for certification or credentialing, and then this story says a lot of the reason why education pays, it's not that you actually improved as a worker, that you're any better at doing anything in the real world. Rather, a lot of the reason that it pays is because it convinces employers that you've got the right stuff. As I say, like that you're smart, that you're hardworking. And also, especially that you're conformist, that you're just willing to submit to a lot of arbitrary rules and say yes, sir. And when they tell you to jump, you just say how high instead of why do I have to do this jump? So anyway, from the point of view of an individual, what I say is it doesn't really matter very much why education pays. But from the point of view of education policy, it matters tremendously. Because if you go to school and you actually get transformed from a callow youth into a skilled adult, then there's actually a gain to society. Society actually is richer because you've turned an unproductive person into a productive one. On the other hand, insofar as the signaling story is right, it really is a zero-sum game, and the government is basically just pouring gasoline on a fire and burning gasoline, but it doesn't really go very far, or doesn't really do much, right? And again, just to understand what this means, there's this idea of credential inflation that over time, it seems like you need more education to get the same jobs that your parents or grandparents could have gotten with less. And if the signaling story is true, we should expect to see a lot of credential inflation. And as I explained in the book, we do see a lot of credential inflation. There really are a lot of jobs that you could previously get with just high school or even less than high school, where now you need a college degree or even an advanced degree. And it doesn't seem like the jobs are any harder. It's just that employers are looking for someone in the top 10 or 20%. And when more people get one degree, you've got to get yet another degree in order to get into that top 10 or 20%. So the heart of the policy recommendation of the book is austerity, a word that I know has a bad connotation, but I love it and I want the word back and I'm ready to fight for the word. To me, austerity is just a dad in the 1980s. When you say, hey, Dad, I need $20, he says, $10, what do you need $5 for? All right. That is like a very sensible attitude. Someone wants money. You want to know, well, what do you need it for? What are you going to do with it? What happened to the last money that I gave you? These are questions that people are very afraid to ask the government subsidized education system. And I say we should not be afraid to ask them. We should ask them forthrightly because they deserve answers. And of course, based on what I'm saying, I think the answer is going to be that a lot of the money's wasted and we'd be better off if we spent less.
So Matthew wanted me to hit a little bit of a devil's advocate question, and I'll go with one right now that I've heard from the other side, and it's that, hey, Bryan, you're talking a lot about the economic payoffs to higher education, that you earn more money if you get a degree, and you're discussing what causes those higher outcomes. But what if education's just all about being more of a human? It's just an endeavor to figure out who you are and to be more human. And you're just Bryan, you're confusing education and economics, and you're looking at it too much from an economist standpoint. And I've heard various versions of this kind of pushback. And what do you say to that kind of, this is about more than just economics and financial benefits?
I mean, first of all, I would actually be super happy if usual boosters of education would just very loudly, repeatedly, and publicly say, Bryan's right about the economics. School isn't really good for getting a better job or for improving society's economic growth or for innovation or any of these material things. And then just pause. All right, and just repeat that one more time to like make sure. And I want the president to say it, all governors of all 50 states.
Right.
I want all the officers of the National Education Association to say it. I'd be more than gratified if I could just get that concession out of them, and then say, but we really think it's still great for these other reasons. Right? And the reason why I would like to get that concession is that it's not just economists who think that this is an important argument. It's actually the most common argument that people make for subsidizing education. And it's also quite clearly the main reason why students go. If students were firmly convinced that going to college would not get them a better job or help them make more money, the share that would actually go, I don't know quite how far it would fall, but I would think it would fall by about 90%, actually. Because
right?
They may say, yes, it's nice to have an aquatic center, but I'm not going to go and spend years of my life and tens of thousands of dollars of my parents' money for a freaking aquatic center. So that's just the first thing I like to say. Now, secondly, in the book, I do have a whole chapter on this, and Honestly, I'm highly sympathetic to the non-economic arguments, which is not surprising. I'm a professor, so I'm a nerd. I like nerdy stuff. I like high culture. I listen to German opera. I watch every Shakespeare movie that I can find. To me, this stuff is great. But it's not enough for schools to say we're trying to inspire love of opera and Shakespeare, therefore we deserve many billions of dollars. Say, like, if you want to make the argument that the money is well spent, you've got to show that you actually successfully inspire students. And this is what I do in my book. I look at the actual data on how successful a school's been at selling high culture and ideas and the arts to students. And the honest answer is they've barely succeeded at all, because hardly anyone voluntarily consumes any of this stuff. So while it might be worthwhile if you could spread love of Shakespeare to the youth of America, and if that was what we got for all the money that we're spending, maybe that would be great. But we're spending the money, but without inspiring the love of Shakespeare. Hardly anyone likes Shakespeare, which is a damn shame. He's great. But to go and use that as a rationalization for why they should keep getting all their money is just absurd. You can't, like, they want to get it for their good intentions. Well, if you want the money, show that you deliver something or other, and that's what they really can't do.
It worked on you, Bryan.
One thing that they do deliver, is the daycare, right? And that's what people are missing the most right now. Is we used to have our kids warehoused in some remote location so we could do our stuff, and now we don't have that anymore. But again, if you were just say that's the purpose of it is to warehouse them, like, can't we do that more cheaply? Like, do we need to have college graduates or even high school graduates just to watch kids and make sure they don't kill each other and burn the school down? So no, we don't. Sorry, what were we saying there, Matthew?
Yeah, no, I was just saying it worked on you, Bryan. Right? The love of Shakespeare was imbued into Bryan Caplan.
Let's say we can't prove that it didn't work on me. What I say in the book is, well, it's hard to figure out how persuasive schools are, but here's what we can definitely say. Schools cannot deserve credit for more than 100% of Shakespeare consumption. So what I do in the book is I just say, let's just, for the sake of argument, give schools 100% credit for all consumption of high culture, for all consumption of ideas. How much is 100% of that? And the answer is, take out your magnifying glass.
Yeah, it's still small, right? Still small. So what's another one, Corey? What's another one that you have pulled up there? The one that I like is the one that I shot over to you. I think because it gets repeated over and over again. Do you have that one handy?
I have a couple of them written down over here. But yeah, Bryan, look, you're a successful economics professor at George Mason University. You got a PhD. You did a lot of higher education. And, you're saying that education isn't all that valuable. And did you not get skills yourself when you went to college? Are you telling me that your degrees are worthless? And are you saying that other people shouldn't be able to go to college too? That's some version of that is the pushback that I've heard.
Right. So again, just to repeat myself, there's two different ways to measure the payoff for education. There's the selfish benefit to me, and there's the social payoff to society. I am very eager to admit that I got a huge selfish payoff out of education. Right. I mean, and I continue to get it. Right. So I have this dream job for life. Everything's great for me. I'm completely content. I have no personal axe to grind against a system that has let me be paid to do whatever I feel like doing. But I don't consider that a good system for society. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you say, didn't I learn any useful skills? Basically, the skills that I learned in school are primarily to teach people to learn the same skills that I learned in school. So I sometimes call this academic incest. This is where someone goes to school and they learn how to teach a subject where the real only thing you can really do with it is to teach it to somebody else. Now that's slight exaggeration for what I do, but still it's uncomfortably close to the truth. Most of what I learned, I only use if I ever teach a class on the subject. My own research is somewhat related, although even there on my own research, like if I were not at a job where they just paid me to be doing it, what exactly would the social value be? For this book, of course, is really high because everyone's going to listen to me and they're going to stop wasting taxpayer money. But for all the other people, and of course, seriously, what I think is my book would have great social value if people would listen, but I see very little sign that more than a few people will listen to me. It's not going to change the system. So yeah, what is the gain to society? There's the fact that the book that should be written on this subject has now been written. Yay! right? But,
So
but like to look people in the eyes and say this is worth all the taxpayer money that has been used to pay my salary. That's just not honest.
yeah, so let's get to signaling for a little bit. In your book, I think you don't claim that college isn't beneficial at all. You just pretty much claim that 80% of the returns or somewhere around there are because of signaling, not actual skill acquisition. If signaling is actually beneficial to students, are there other ways of signaling, or should we still just continue going to college because college has that signaling benefit?
Yeah, so I say is that if we're talking selfishly, then as long as all the government money keeps drowning the system in subsidies, then probably like at least if you were a good student in high school, you're making a very wise decision. I'm not saying that you should drop out of school and start a company or something like that. Most people would totally fail at that. So why would I recommend that? So that's again, my claim is just that the money that is being spent in you is not really doing very much for society. Now, you said 80%. So yeah, I think that people do acquire some useful skills in college, some useful skills earlier in school, but so much of it winds up getting wasted.
So like when I was in K through 12, I think a few people, remember a few things, little tidbits from K through 12. This is one of them that I remember. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I know that. I know A squared plus B squared equals C squared, but I've never really used that in my day-to-day job. Do you think that your arguments that you make in the case against education as it applies to higher education apply to K through 12 as well? And could you discuss a little bit about maybe how it does apply and maybe if there are any differences?
Yeah. So many people keep misquoting the title of the book. So it is actually the case against education, not the case against higher education. What I'll say is that anytime I look at any kind of schooling, I see enormous waste. Right now, you could say, well, maybe it's just waste rather than signaling, but the system's so cumulative where if you don't do well in elementary school, then you have trouble getting to the honors classes, or you don't do well in elementary school, you have trouble getting the honors class in middle school, don't get the honors class in middle school, have trouble getting the honors class in high school, don't do well in high school, you have trouble doing college. So I do see this great chain sort of Rube Goldberg advice where even when you go back to the earliest stages, if you were just say, I refuse to go and learn this, you'll be penalized. So I think there's a lot of signaling even in early grades. Now, does the share change over time? Plausibly so, that college is even more wasteful than stuff that's happening earlier. But yeah, like sometimes people say, well, what you're saying makes sense for college, but high school, that's all about teaching basic skills. And my reaction is always, what high school did you go to? I wish I went there because my high school, we spent tons of time doing completely worthless stuff that everyone knew I was never going to need to know again.
So what about the arguments? So like with coronavirus, there's a lot of people at home being educated right now. I think you educate your children at home anyway. But a lot of people will say, well, the main benefit of schooling and brick and mortar schooling is to socialize the children. How will they ever, how will these children ever become socialized properly without, government run schools or brick and mortar schools?
Yeah. So there are a whole lot of arguments, including this one, where if you say, I'm going to compare school to playing video games in a basement, school looks pretty good. All right. So, yeah, we're like living in a closet. All right. So, living in a closet, you just be in the dark all day, biting off your fingernails. And then you go to school and you have friends and there's stimulation and there's different activities. All right. So, if that's the comparison, then school is going to look pretty good. But that's not a reasonable comparison. It's not reasonable if you look at kids throughout history. It's not reasonable if you look at other countries where people spend less time in school. So I'd say the reasonable comparison, once you are at a level where you're not hitting other kids and knocking over spaghetti sauce whenever you're in a room with spaghetti sauce, is that the reasonable alternative is work. It's work. This is what young adults or old children have done throughout history: is you start working, right? And this is what I say is the most plausible replacement for school, is just for people to be working at an early age. This doesn't mean being a chimney sweep or a coal miner, but just getting kids exposed to a wide range of realistic jobs and start learning them, right? And again, people start getting teary-eyed, they've lost their childhood. And it's like, well, like if you could either be doing schoolwork for 10 hours a day or like working in a donut shop for a few of those hours, like, should we really pity the kid who works in the donut shop? Like, why? Right?
Well, and you don't get paid for schooling. You get paid for the
of
donut
course,
shop, right?
Of course.
Right.
And again, of course, they're socializing on almost all jobs too, right? And again, and just the idea that every person prefers to be in school rather than working, there's a whole large group of people who actually find school much more painful than work. However, they rarely write essays or give speeches discussing, an ode to why I prefer school to work, or prefer work to school. Or an essay giving 17 arguments for the preferability of doing to writing. There is a reason why such essays barely exist, because the kinds of people who would write those essays don't want to write them. They want to do stuff. And so anyway, worth keeping in mind if you start feeling sorry for kids that have jobs, consider the double standard of how miserable many kids are in school.
Yeah, I mean, just to quote Michael Malice, I was on his podcast a few weeks ago. He always says that, schools are one of the only places where a lot of kids will ever experience violence in their lives. So there's a lot of negative aspects.
Yeah.
There's socialization, but what does that actually mean? It could mean, in getting in fights, being bullied and having a lot of issues with that. So not all socialization is a positive thing. And I think, Bryan, you point out that there are other ways to become socialized that don't have all of these negative or unintended consequences.
They don't result in bloody noses.
Yeah. I mean,
and just the idea that the best way to get socialization is just to be with a bunch of kids your own age. Well, when they're all your own age, then you're all on a similar maturity level. If you want to teach people to act like adults, better to give them more interaction with adults, and that's what you get on a job.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I saw a few of your interviews about the case against education, and I really liked. We haven't touched on this yet, so I want to bring it up. Could you just go over some examples of signaling in the higher ed system, or even the K through 12 system? Like, if you look at this, that shows us that a lot.
I call it the signs of signaling or the symptoms of signaling. Sure. So here's one. Why do kids look for easy A's? All right. If you want to actually learn the material, you would probably want to get a challenging, demanding teacher who doesn't just hand A's out like candy. And yet kids, and including college students, almost always seek out people that will give them the highest grade for the least work. This doesn't look like someone who's trying to acquire useful skills. It looks like someone who's trying to get a stamp on their forehead, A+ for very little work. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's one sign of it. Another one, which is highly relevant, is back before the coronavirus hit, if you wanted to go to the just back up. So first of all, figure out what do you think is the best college in America. So just come up with your personal answer to that. All right, now let me tell you, you can go to that school and learn as much as you want for free without even applying. How? Just move to that school and start attending classes. I've gone to Princeton. They do not card you. There's no effort made to prevent people from getting free education. Right. If you want to go, just start attending classes, and likely no one will ever even notice that you're there. If you're compulsively honest, you can even go to the professor and say, I'm not really a student here. Would you mind if I audited your class? And most professors will first be shocked and stunned and confused, and then get a little tear come down their cheek like, you want to learn what I have to teach? Good gracious, this has never happened in all my days. Right. So it gives you an idea then, the thing that people are looking for when they go and fill out the applications and wait to get accepted and then pay tuition, they're not there for the learning. They're there for what you don't have if you do it the guerrilla way. And that is official recognition that you were there, the grades, and so on. That's what you actually are paying all that money to. That's why George Mason students pay money to go to Mason instead of going to Princeton for free, is Mason will certify that they were there and Princeton won't if you try it through that unofficial path.
And it looks like I'm on Rate My Professor right now. It looks like if you're a hard professor, you get a lower score.
Oh yeah.
Is that the case on Rate My Professor? So like, if the benefit to education was actually getting an education, you would think difficulty or, how hard the professor presses you would be a good thing, not a bad thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And someone else pointed out that there isn't any ranking on Rate My Professor for real-world relevance of the material.
Oh, but there's a hotness rating. There's a hotness rating, which has nothing to do with.
Very jealous. I've never gotten a tamale.
Nice. Hey, I have a question for you here, and I think our listeners, for those who haven't read the book yet, um, this is an interesting part of your book that was kind of like a light bulb went on. I was like, yeah, that just sounds right to me. I didn't even have to look at all the research to see this or to recognize the truth in it. We teach students how to think, not what to think.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have arguments around that I think would be great. Why don't you explain that, Bryan?
Sure. So anytime you've been in a class where it's obvious to everyone that the material is completely useless in real life, that you only use it if you become the teacher, so trigonometry or like Shakespeare or Latin, right? Or, like our history class. So when challenged, teachers have a stock answer to that. And they say, look, I don't teach you what to think. I teach you how to think. I'm building critical thinking skills. You're learning how to learn. So all slight variations on the same theme of, sure, the specifics are not useful, but the general transformation of your mind is incredibly valuable. All right. So it's a story that we've heard many times. However, there is a whole academic field that measures these broad effects of education. Right? It's called educational psychology. They've been measuring these effects for about a century. They really want to find these effects. You don't go into educational psychology because you don't believe in learning how to learn. You go in it because you do believe in learning how to learn. And yet, the end result of a century worth of research is shell shock, because educational psychologists come away saying, look, we have tried to find this learning how to learn, learning how to think stuff for 100 years. We've racked our brains to detect it. It's very hard to find much sign that it actually exists. Right. And now you may say, all right, fine. Well, that's a bunch of research. I don't really understand the research, but common sense says that you're learning how to learn, you're learning how to think, you're building mental muscles is another metaphor. And I say common sense does not actually go along with this building mental muscles thing. Because here's the thing. Suppose that you go to the gym and you only work your bicep, your bicep every day, right? Working a specific muscle. Does that strengthen the rest of your body? Barely. If I only work my right bicep, my left bicep will not be stronger, right? And what I say is building mental muscles is actually very similar to building physical muscles. The analogy is a good one. You improve what you actually work on, and the other stuff that you ignore doesn't improve by a noticeable amount. Furthermore, it's even worse than it sounds, because in the same way as if you work out for a month and then you stop working out for a month, you go back to where you were. Similarly, if you learn material that you don't use, you forget it. So we really have this quite dire situation, which people don't want to admit because it sounds bad. You sound like a mean person. And of course, it's bad for business. So teachers don't want to say, yeah, we can't really do very much for you, or like it's glorified daycare. Maybe they say that. It's like, well, if it's glorified daycare, why do we need to have college grads teaching the classes? I mean, of course, that's a more general question. Why do we have college grads to teach kindergarten? According to any known theory, why do you need a college degree to teach kindergarten? You're years ahead of the kids, so you can answer all their questions. So why pay extra, right? And it's not about saving money. It's always easy to say when it's taxpayer money. If it's your money, these would be reasonable questions.
So on that, what do you think about compulsory education laws in general? I mean, we have them in every state in the United States. Do you think maybe they should be shortened by a year? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think the compulsory attendance laws actually make very much difference. I mean, especially now
you can get out of it, right?
Now that every state has homeschooling, there's usually a bunch of ways of getting out of it if you want to get out of it. I think that this is basically codifying what almost everyone would do. Now, I'm definitely libertarian enough to say, well, 1 or 2% of people would want to do something else and we should let them. But again, I don't think the laws explain why people spend so much time in school. Actually, there's this large body of research in economics where they try to use compulsory attendance laws to measure the effect of making someone get an extra year of school. And the first problem with this research is that it's not even clear that states with higher compulsory attendance ages have people getting more education. So they have to actually first massage the data even to detect this alleged effect of the compulsory attendance law. So again, I think it's more of a law like you can't burn money. Which is like, well, fine, I can't do something hardly anyone's inclined to do anyway. What difference does it make? Right. But now what I think would make an enormous difference is if the government stops spending money on later years of education. Because there's a lot of people who will take free education, even if they don't have to, or make their kid take it, but who would not shell out that money if the government says, well, if you want more education, it comes out of your pocket. And in this way, we could get people into the labor force at an earlier age, which I think is all for the good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think about, I see mixed views from libertarians on this. So I'd like to get your take. What do you think about allowing people to take half of what they would have gotten in the government school system to use that for homeschooling expenses? So like we spend like what, $15,500 per year per student. What if we allow people to take like 10,000 of that to use for homeschooling or something else?
Yeah. So since I'm homeschooling 4 kids right now, I can barely repress my urge to go, hell yeah, totally that money. But clearly you don't just want to get my personal bias reaction out of it. So what I would say is that I think it's very likely this would reduce total government spending, right? Because right now, so like obviously this would mean that there's currently some people that are homeschooling and don't get that money, and now they would get the money. All right, so that's going to be that's going to mean that government is going to spend more on them, but that's a small share of people. On the other hand, the fraction of people that would switch over to homeschooling, if they could get that much extra money per year, I think that would easily multiply the share of kids that get homeschooled by 5, maybe 10 or more, especially if you could take that money and use it to hire a tutor or something like that.
Yep.
And then as long as you are spending less per student, then I think actually this would save taxpayers money. And then in terms of the quality of education that kids get, I think it would probably be quite similar. Like the main thing, that I would just, I think you should point out, you're honest, is that there is a small share of just totally irresponsible parents. I'm not saying that it's even 10%, but say 3% who would just take the money and spend it on drugs or alcohol or gamble it away or whatever while their kids are illiterate and numerate, right? So, right, or at least they only pick up the literacy and numeracy they'll pick up from the internet and television. So there is that.
So on that, what do you think? I think there's like 2 different possibilities of how to, to kind of make sure that that's not a problem with the system. One way is to just say that the expenses have to be used for education approved expenditures. On the other hand, we could just allow people to make it a cash transfer and then have the government come in when we see bad actors and when we see instances of the extreme neglect or educational abuse or whatever you want to call it. Which do you think would be a better solution in your view?
Right.
Like a before the fact or after?
You only use the money for educational expenses. This really just becomes a flexible voucher program. Basically, because it means then the parent cannot just write themselves a check for teaching their kids, presumably. Otherwise, it's meaningless. So that has it does cut down on the problems of extreme child neglect or just wasting the money, but it, on the other hand, it also means that people then like homeschoolers no longer actually get the benefit. It does actually create a bizarre scenario where I could pay you to homeschool my kids, you pay me to homeschool your kids, right? And that way we both collect the money. And once we got that deal going, then crisscross. Well, I say that I'm homeschooling your kids while I'm doing my kids, and so on. So you've got that. In the end, I think that it's a good idea overall, and so I think the right way to deal with problems of neglectful parents isn't to punish the overwhelming majority of parents who are doing a fine job, but to go and say, look, if we find actual cases of neglect, then we'll cut off the money or whatever.
So to get into taxpayer expenditures a little bit, and to go back to your book a little bit, we've seen this. If I can toggle correctly, we've seen this response to your book, The Case Against Education, in which one of whoever this is who responded to it, I don't need to go over his name, but he points out, hey, there are some bad educational experiences, Bryan, but it's only because we're not spending enough in education right now. If we just spent more, we wouldn't have bad educational experiences. So what is your response to that?
Yeah, so my response is it's a totally reasonable point, and we should assess it fairly. So yes, anytime that you see someone's getting a bad result, one possibility is they're wasting their money and should stop wasting the money on it. The other possibility is that they are cutting corners, and if they would just stop being such cheapskates, they could get something that's worthwhile. All right, now how would you distinguish these two scenarios? Right, and in my book I talk about you got some fungus cream. All right, so there's a but you have some so it's supposed to go and cure your toenail fungus, but the toenail fungus is still there. So what would be some signs of it? Well, you'd want to go and see, if I go and put if once in a while I put on a lot of the cream, does it actually wind up working out well? You'd want to things like that. You'd want to see how much total am I spending in this stuff. So if you're spending 5 cents on fungus cream and you haven't solved your problem, all right, fine, I'll go up to $5. All right, but once you're at spending $100 a month on it, someone says, "Hey, you're just being a cheapskate." Well, how much do I have to spend to get the stuff that works? Right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what I say is, in the case of education, we are spending well in excess of $10,000 per student per year, and yet we get very little out of it. And at that point, say, look, if it really worthwhile, we should be seeing big payoffs now. And I just say that we're not. Furthermore, you might want to go and look more closely at what you're spending money on. Things like, all right, so right now we spend typically 2 years studying foreign language in high school. And how much of the distance from 0 to fluent do we close during those 2 years? And the answer is maybe 1%. All right. So while in theory, this is possible. And by the way, actually, since I am a homeschooling parent, there have been a number of cases where I have just said, look, I know other people don't make this work. We're going to make it work. And I just put in a lot more effort. So my sons actually did learn Spanish in homeschool, right? But in order to do this, they didn't just put in 10% more effort than a regular kid puts into Spanish. They put in probably 20 times the effort.
Right.
Now, I didn't actually press them to do this. Once they started learning, they got interested. But say, look, in order to really get a payoff for foreign language, we have to do 20 times as much. Otherwise, they're not going to be fluent and they're not going to learn to speak the language in a useful way. So does it really make sense to put 20 times the resources into this thing?
Brian, did I just hear you call for, increasing education spending by 20 times? Is that...
Yeah. Let's just edit it so it sound that way. There's a lot of things where you would have to do that. Although even there, a lot of times the time is important, but a big thing that I noticed, and a big reason why I took my older kids out of public school, is to say that the teachers just have the wrong attitude. What do I mean by that? I mean, they have a very emotional, touchy-feely attitude. They're not focused on the mastering of a body of knowledge. I am someone who focuses on the mastery of a body of knowledge. So when I taught my son's history, we don't do posters. We don't go and watch little videos. We read the book, learn material, write essays about it, take tests. That's the way that you master body material. And then we discuss the material. We do hypotheticals. We go and we have a strict hardline attitude, where we say there's really understanding it and then there's fake understanding it. This isn't about the student's feelings. It's about mastery of knowledge. And if you don't have that attitude, again, it's very hard to master a body of knowledge if you aren't even trying to master a body of knowledge. And that's really what I see is so wrong with the whole teaching philosophy of schools. Mm-hmm. And again, you might say, well, then why don't we just switch over to your philosophy, Brian? And I'll say, those people will not switch to my philosophy. They're just the wrong personality type. You could make me the principal of the school, and the only thing I could do is start firing people because stop thinking about the students' feelings so much. That's not what we're focused on. Focus on whether they can demonstrably show that they understand the material, right? And if you don't, then you failed. Right, and that is not the attitude that people running to working day schools have.
So that, speaking of feelings, this wasn't on my list to talk about, but I'm open to this page on your book, Brian, The Politics of Social Desirability Bias. And feelings made me think of this. So can you explain that, just back of the napkin? Tell our listeners what you're talking about in that part of your book.
Right. So there's many ideas that have migrated from psychology over to economics and social science. And out of all the ideas that should have migrated but really haven't, social desirability bias is my number one idea. Social desirability bias, it's a fancy name for a simple idea which just says that when the truth sounds bad, people lie. And they often lie so much that they lose contact with what the truth ever was. Simple examples of this are just things like, am I fat? All right, there's a socially desirable answer to that. And the answer is, of course, no, Brian, you look
No, you're not fat. Great.
All right. Or, did you go to church? Did you vote? Right. So there's a lot, like large number of questions where there's a socially desirable answer. And psychologists have confirmed the obvious point that when the truth sounds bad, people lie. So, and you can see this in things as simple as are you better than most people at getting along with other people? And something like 95% of people put themselves above the median. Of
course.
Right? Yeah. Are you nicer than the typical person? Almost everyone says they are. Right. So anyway, large body of this, just confirming the obvious. But what's interesting about it is that economists have generally been mistrustful of what people say without being at all aware of the data. Economists are sort of saying, you can't really trust people. And what this research says is, well, sometimes you can trust people. Like if you ask someone, should I turn left or right to get to your house? You can trust them for that.
Right.
Or even like which way is up? All right, fine, that's up. But when the truth is socially desirable, that's when people start lying. That's when people start losing contact with the truth itself, right? All the way down to there's no such thing as a stupid child, right? When people say that, I don't think they're saying, okay, well, obviously that's ridiculous, but let me lie so people like me. Instead, they've just lost the propensity to evaluate the sentence truthfully. And they just, yeah, of course, every child's stupid. Or like what happened? There were a lot of stupid kids when I was a kid. What, did they all disappear? Where did the stupid kids all go? Like, of course, there's lots.
Well, and I think you also have a social desirability bias to say, education is really important. Education,
yes.
There are obvious benefits to education because
nothing is more important than education.
Right? Yeah, and if you don't say that, it almost makes it look like, well, your degrees must be useless too.
My kids.
Well,
yeah,
that too.
So I bring up the social desirability bias to say that I think a lot of what's going on with the conversation about education is that people don't want to talk about reality accurately. They want to sound like nice people. Right now, I'd like to sound like a nice person too, but my priority is absolute candor. Just getting to the bottom of what's going on. And if you can tell me a way to get people to like me while I'm telling them that we're wasting $1 trillion a year on education, then I'd love to hear it. But if the only way to get through to people is to stick my neck out and say, I know I don't want to hear this, but it's the truth. Other people can do their thing, but I'm going to be the town crier saying, hey, education's overrated. Ring, ring, ring. Let's see.
This is why you're not invited to parties, right, Brian?
He hosts his own parties.
Okay.
No, but that's just it, right? You're right. I mean, people don't like hearing things, uncomfortable truths, right? Mm-hmm. And so, this is good, Erica's comment. I want to read this though, Brian, because this is interesting. This hit me. Human beings don't like expressing or believing ugly truths. Instead, we gravitate in word and thought to reviews that sound good. Psychologists call this, etc. There's no such thing as a stupid child sounds better than 10% of children are stupid. So, and we know, at least from data that we get from IQ testing, that IQ scores are normally distributed. Mm-hmm. So you would be factually correct in saying just that. But then you're a bad person. You hate people. Yeah. I mean, so those are some uncomfortable things to say. But the actual truth there is, maybe the better route here is to get people aligned with things that interest them and that they can function well in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so besides just pushing austerity and spending less money on education, I also talk about vocational education. Mm-hmm. I got a chapter on that. I think it just comes down to a lot of kids do not like academics. They're not good at academics. And the American system basically makes them stay in academics until they drop out of or fail out of school. And then the U.S. has a really bad pattern of especially male high school dropouts just ending up in prison or just out of the labor force. Right. And there are other countries take the same kind of kids, like countries like Switzerland and Germany. They take the same kind of kids and they get them in the workforce at a young age and they train them. and they build real skills, and they are then much more functional adults. So the underclass in the U.S. looks so much worse and so much larger than the underclass in a place like Germany and Switzerland. And a lot of it is that here we take kids that, there they take kids that would have failed out and ended up in jail or permanently unemployed, and they train them to be a mechanic or to be a plumber or something like that. I mean, I say it's just a great alternative to the current American system.
Yeah, so Bryan, we've talked a lot about, a lot of the problems in the current education system in the U.S., but you also have another really great book, The Myth of the Rational Voter. Could you talk about maybe there isn't a connection, but is there a connection between what you talk about in this book and how that could lead into, ineffective policies in the education space?
Yeah, of course, like the two books are as tightly connected as two hands together right now. So here's the thing. Many people have, after listening to me argue about education, have just fallen back on, all right, look, Bryan, no country on earth does what you're saying, so you're wrong. It's like, all right, well, what can you say about that? And I go, yeah, my first book. So my first book actually says that it is very common for policies to be very popular yet very bad. And why is that? Because often the truth doesn't sound very good. And what is an election? An election is a popularity contest. It's a contest for the popularity of people, and it's also a contest for the popularity of ideas. So I say this is my story about why no country on earth listens to me, is that if you are running for office, what you want to say is children of the future, every child, it can grow up to be president. Every child, we can't, there's no telling who the next Einstein is. We're going to teach all the children to think and critical reasoning, and they're going to be Renaissance people, and we'll inspire them. And that's what you say if you want to win. Mm-hmm. As it sounds good. And it's a popularity contest. So when you're trying to win a popularity contest, just pander to people's prejudices. And I say this is actually a general problem with government overall. Definitely a problem with democracy. And actually, I say really dictatorship is not so different, because dictators generally don't want to be hated. Right? There's a small number where they are where basically a small group manages to seize control of our country and get an absolute stranglehold, and then they ram terrible, unpopular stuff down the throat of the country. Especially Marxism-Leninism has a pattern of doing that. But more normal dictatorships, they're drawn from regular people in the country, more or less. They're not complete weirdballs or weirdos or oddballs, and they too want to be liked. And they don't want people to be angry at them. And so they also adopt policies and say things that sound good. But again, if you go and listen to dictator speeches on YouTube, very rarely they give a speech saying, "You are my slaves and you will do as I command." Even Kim Jong-un doesn't talk in a speech like that, right? So
of course,
it gives you an idea that all politicians feel some reason to go and pander to the feelings of the public, whether or not it makes sense, and democracies, this incentive to pander especially so. And I think that's really what's gone on with education, is that almost all of us know through firsthand experience what a joke most education is, but we keep it in our own heads. It's part of our life story about all that time I had that ridiculous class that I had to do and that terrible teacher. But when someone asks us what we think about education in general, we very rarely draw upon what we know. And instead, we start reciting touchy-feely, feel-good slogans. So try to get people to stop doing that and say, look, trust what you saw. Don't trust what you hear other people tell you to think.
So does any of this pandering have anything to do with this? and so what is your response to a lot of these presidential candidates, either calling for free college or similar policies like student debt cancellation? I think Biden just came out with this, like a week ago. What are your thoughts on those types of proposals?
I mean, good grief. If you could think about policies that made less sense from the point of view of any known political philosophy, I'd like to hear what they are. So, the basic fact is that college graduates and people who go to college on average are better off, and the people who are lower income are less likely to go to college. And while more spending can go and tip that a bit, it does not transform it. So basically, when you forgive college debt, what you're doing is giving a large transfer to better off young people. Right? So it is extremely wasteful. you're going and throwing a pile of money just to help a few people that are in over their heads with debt who didn't wind up getting good jobs. So if you had any idea of spending the money wisely, you would target it to the small number of people that went to college that where things worked out poorly for them and help them out, rather than just doing the scattershot approach. Right. This is my general view about redistribution, by the way, is anyone who just says, I want to give money to everyone, we should immediately ignore everything they say, because they're clearly irresponsible and mushheads. Right. Like, it makes sense to go and target government money to solve a problem. That could make sense. Throwing money at everybody does not make sense according to any model, any philosophy. It's just crazy. It's just what a drunken sailor does when you give him $1 billion. So yeah, again, of course, if you thought that education really was great for society, then the rationale would be easy to understand. It's saying that, well, we want more people to go. Right now it costs them too much, but it's so great for society that they're not doing it on their own. In the case of the debt forgiveness, there you would have to say, we want to send a signal in the future that anyone who does something that benefits society that isn't good for them, maybe you'll get a debt forgiveness out of that. So that's the game to it. But yeah, I think that these policies are just terrible. And again, what I would recommend is exactly the opposite. So spending less means testing the spending so that if you're able to pay for it yourself, the government does not help you. Saying that, if you want the student loan, then either you do it on the free market, my first choice, or you can do it, but there's a high interest rate right now, or if there's going to be subsidies, then it's limited only to the very needy, and we don't just waste money on everyone regardless of need.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. I want to make sure I phrase this right. So it's going to take me a second to formulate, type this out. But is there a chance that, in light of current circumstances, you mentioned you're homeschooling kids right now, and of course, we all are right now. The phrase, right, where it's become popular, we're all homeschoolers now.
Yep.
So, is there a chance, and maybe what are the chances, that we, as citizens of the country, and parents start to wake up to the idea that maybe education isn't what it's cracked up to be? And is the time period just too short? No, there's no chance, because if this went on for 2 years, maybe you'd start to get people waking up. Or, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'd give that less than 2%. And here's the thing. This is an extremely inauspicious experiment in homeschooling.
Right.
Thrust upon people without warning, whether they like it or not. They've got very limited options to go and bring in other people to help them. And then, of course, it's also going to be psychologically associated with a whole bunch of terrible things, and death, associated with death and disease and loneliness and so on. So, honestly, I think this is a good way to turn a lot of people off of homeschooling. I still suspect that the share that does it will be increased as a result, because though a large majority will say, God, I hated that, I wanted to be done with it as soon as I could, there will be some others who said, I never gave it a chance, but now I actually like it. So, I don't think there's going to be any people who were homeschooling before who will say, oh, now I changed my mind. So we'll keep all of them. And then I think we'll get a small share of the others who said, hey, it actually was a good experience for me. But yeah, for most parents, this is a miserable experience. They're trying to do their job simultaneously. Yeah. There isn't any easy way of pooling with other parents to divide the responsibilities without warning. So yeah, I think that this is pretty much designed to discredit homeschooling. It's optimized to discredit homeschooling for a lot of people. Right. In the same way that, just imagine that suddenly everyone had to get on a cruise ship tomorrow, or everyone had to go to a baseball game. I don't think this would just really sour a lot of people on it.
Wow, I'm really into baseball.
The stadium was completely packed. There were tramplings. People were falling off the cruise ships. They were so overcrowded. No, I don't want to go on a cruise again. I think that's more likely to be the reaction, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of parent, so I think a lot of parents are actually just shirking and are just letting their kids play video games. For me, it was a good chance because I was homeschooling my older kids, but not my younger kids. So this was a good chance for me to find out how much have my kids even been learning in these years. What do they even know? And so I spent a couple of days just assessing where they were, and then okay, now I know where you are. All right, so let's start there and get moving. Right? Yeah. So For the younger kids, we're probably moving ahead at 3 to 5 times the speed they would have been doing in math in regular school, because again, they just don't give them much time for math, and then when they do it, there is very little sense of this is a train that has begun moving towards calculus. That's why this is the calculus train. We start off here in arithmetic, and chugga 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 chugga. All right, we're all right. Multi-decimal, multi-digit subtraction, multiplication, division, long division, percentages, fractions, algebra, geometry, algebra 2, trigonometry, calculus. So that's the way that what I have in my mind when I teach math. Doesn't mean that I'm pushing them ahead. It's rather, look, all this stuff must be learned. We must go to every stop along this train. We will learn the material, and then this is a destination that we'll end up, right? So, and that is the one thing where I am non-compromising with my kids. So that's how I'm not an unschooler. So I say, look, there's one thing you absolutely have to do, and that's math, because if you don't learn it as a kid, then you have mostly eliminated your chance to do a wide range of desirable jobs. And you're too young to know that you don't want to do a job that has math in it. So that is something that I push on. But anyway, that's something that I've been doing. I doubt many other people are taking advantage of the opportunity like this. Although, hey, why not?
So could you talk a little bit about your experience with the homeschool, if there's any regulations in Virginia, or do you have to go through any kind of hoops in order to be registered or anything like that?
Yeah, Virginia is one of the most lightly regulated homeschooling states in the union. So actually, if you really wanted to, I could just make up a religion and then write a letter saying my religion allows me to do this, and that would be the end of it legally. You have to send a letter every year. So there's also rules saying that you can have your kids evaluated once a year by anyone with a graduate degree. I have a graduate degree, so legally I could actually self-evaluate if I wanted to.
I'm doing an awesome job.
Yeah, I'm great. So anyway, so Virginia is a super homeschooling friendly state, and I totally support that. Again, does this open up the opportunity for terrible parents to do a terrible job? Yes. I just think that the world should not be based around making everyone suffer because of a few bad people. In terms of my experience, so my older kids did regular school until 6th grade, and then they were just getting more and more unhappy, both with with the regimentation and the busy work and the meaninglessness of it, and just the non-academic focus. And so, actually, what we did to start is I said, okay, this is going to be a trial period, and in the month of August, before you start regular 7th grade, we're just going to have a trial period for homeschooling and see how it works. And you have to commit. You have to give up a month of your summer as your partner share if you want to invest in this enterprise. And they were happy to do that, and that worked out well for us. And so then we did homeschooling for both years of middle school. And then me and my sons both wanted to continue through high school. Everything seemed to be going very well. My wife wanted them to go back to regular school. So they did that they went back to regular high school for 3 weeks, but we were so disappointed with the experience that all of us were then convinced to switch back to homeschooling. And now my older sons are finishing up 11th grade. So let's see, so in grades 7 through 10, they completed 10 AP tests each, which is pretty good.
Whoa.
That's really good. It's really good.
Yeah. So
you knocked them out of the park too, right?
Yep. So, and actually this means, so usually very advanced students, they're only getting started at AP tests in 11th grade. So, we'll have a lot. And again, there is a signaling element here. We want to signal to colleges that this isn't just their dad saying that they're good, where understandably they're going to be doubtful about that. And my older sons, they've also been able to take classes at Mason. There's a program at Mason for high school kids to take college classes. This last semester, they were able to do independent study officially under a historian here, and they've written a publishable paper, which, of course, I'm their dad. I think it's very good.
Wow.
But I'll predict it will get published in some academic journal. So pretty good when you're in 11th grade.
Woo.
Really good.
And by the way, so my older sons have both wanted to be professors themselves for a long time. So, they understand everything that I've been telling them, and they just say, but it looks like a great deal. And I say, yeah, of course. Right. It's a great deal for the professors. But my conscience does bother me a bit. I am a whistleblower. I at least want taxpayers to know they're getting ripped off. So, hello, taxpayers, you are being ripped off. Just thought you ought to know.
That's good.
And so, do they have like an idea of what type of professors they want to be and the subject?
Yeah. So I think like in a ideal world where there are a lot of jobs for history professors, they'd rather be history professors, but they know that there are not many such jobs. So their plan is to be economics professors and then do economic history, and that way you can combine a lot of interest together. So, that's their current plan. They've had it for a while. And again, like I definitely did not pressure them and say, like if you want to be called my son, you've got to be an economics professor. I always try to actually say, look, you're seeing how great it can be to be professor, but let me remind you about all the people who crashed and burned trying to be professors, and just, be aware that is a possibility. One of my sons says that one of his great nightmare in life is to have a non-academic job. Right? I say, it's not that bad, but
Erica wants to know if they are twins.
Yeah. The older two are identical twins, so that's made it easy because their interests are so similar. They're so much on the same level. And seeing my other kids, I've got a fifth grader and a second grader, so that's been a little bit more work because I've got to juggle, and there are two different levels of math, right? And then I've actually got my older sons teaching the younger one Spanish, and again, that has some issues. Again, I guess I was hoping more that the youth advantage in foreign language would outweigh any maturity disadvantage, and so far that's probably not true. But still, here's the thing: is that Fairfax County Public Schools officially have Spanish in the curriculum. My younger kids have been learning Spanish for years, and yet I would say in 2 days they learned more Spanish here than they did in all those years of school. So, and again, it's just a wrong attitude that they have there. It's that it's all supposed to be a big game. Right, and we're all learning Spanish together. Right? Instead of, look, there's a language called Spanish. Like either you can speak it or you can't speak it. And we're going to actually master this body of knowledge so you can speak Spanish, and so you could be dropped in Spain and you can talk to people and do things. And if you can't do that, then you played a Spanish game, but you haven't really studied Spanish.
Yeah, my high school required everyone to take 3 years of Spanish. I know some stuff, and I'm not gonna do it on air because it's embarrassing. But most people did not retain much of any of the Spanish speaking skills. They just kind of went through the hoops to get the grade, and they passed obviously, but they don't remember any of that Spanish if you ask them now.
No recuerdo. It's actually true. My Spanish is now at its all-time peak, which is not good, but I had 3 years of Spanish in junior high and high school where I learned almost nothing. And then since my sons are speaking it and we're watching everything with Spanish subtitles, I've picked up a lot more from that than I ever got from school, although still I'm no good. But but again, like if I put in a lot of time, but then I could, but it would, like the time and just a serious focused attitude, one where you stop kidding yourself about how good you are and just face facts, like how good, what do I really know? And like once you're there, it's okay. Now I know where I am. Now I can proceed from there, rather than just telling everyone, "Oh, you kids are great. Oh, we've learned so much. We've come so far." Have we?
Yeah, I mean, this is a quote from your book that human beings poorly retain knowledge they rarely use. And right after high school, I was traveling to, and in college, I was traveling to Mexico and Spain. And so I used it and practiced it. And I grew up in Texas, in San Antonio. So I practiced it a lot and heard it a lot. But now I'm in DC. And even before DC, I moved to Arkansas. And, I just didn't practice it as much. And now, it seems like it's really slipping. And I think this really, this quote in your book really highlights that. And I think a lot of what we learned in high school, even if we learned it at the time, we don't remember a lot of that, except for that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Just because I guess it was drilled into our head so much.
For all A, B, and C, right?
Right. Well, hey, we've kept you longer than you promised to talk, Bryan, but it's been fun. You lose track of time when you're Have
Yeah,
a good time.
great pleasure. And yeah, of course, I'm looking for a little distraction right now too, just like anybody else. Yeah, so great fun talking about this. I mean, for me, what I always leave people with is, like, should you believe me or all the other researchers saying something different? And partly I say that if you actually read the other researchers on an issue by issue basis, they're not really saying anything that much different from me. It's just that they have their big picture is heavily marinated in the social desirability bias.
Yeah.
But anyway, I say, you don't really need to read research to get a good understanding of what's going on, because anyone listening has probably spent at least 10 years in school. You got a lot of firsthand experience. You've had some jobs. You can actually say, look, when did I use what I learned in school on the job? How often did it happen? To what extent is that true? And, I really just encourage people to really just critically think about your own experience, not what you're supposed to say about it, but describe what you actually saw with your own eyes. And I think you'll end up agreeing mostly with me, not with the other people.
Yeah, and with that, thank you, Bryan Caplan. We're super happy, and I know our audience has been super engaged throughout the entire conversation. So, thanks so much for joining us and giving us more than an hour of your time today. And just a reminder to everybody, this is Bryan Caplan's pretty recent book from 2018, The Case Against Education. I recommend it very highly to anyone on this podcast, and to recommend it to your friends. It's only $20 hardcover on Amazon.com, Kindle version $13. And then also we're going to be giving away a free copy of this book, and we'll send it to your address if you did provide some commentary during our discussion today. So I want to thank the audience. Want to thank Bryan Caplan for coming out with us today, and I want to thank Matthew Nielsen for setting this all up for us to have this conversation.
Thanks, Bryan. Really,
my pleasure. So great talking to you guys, and just everyone, stay safe and try to have some fun too.
Good.
Cool. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Care.
Okay, talk to you later. Thanks a lot.
See ya.